Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the REL Central webinar titled Broadening the Benefits of Dual Enrollment, Strategies to Increase Program Access and Participation. We'll take just the next few seconds here to get yourselves settled in, and we'll cover a few administrative details while you do so. I'm John Lopez, Senior Education Improvement Specialist at REL Central. We appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join us as we have what will be an engaging conversation to explore a critical part of our secondary and post-secondary education system across the nation. We'll be talking about dual enrollment. So I'm sure our audience is well familiar with that. But before we get into what will be a discussion with some outstanding panelists, we're going to cover a few administrative details here. So this webinar is being live captioned. So to take advantage of the service, we're going to ask you to copy and paste the link that was sent, copy into the chat, and you should get a pre-populated sign-in page. You should be able to just click register. No need to fill out anything in addition to that, and hopefully you'll be ready to go and join us at that moment. The next item of how best to participate and keep us all on track today. You'll notice on this slide, and if you're not looking, I will share it with you. Pretty common these days to mute participants to reduce background noise. However, you're welcome to communicate with us using the Q&A box. We're going to monitor that, so use that as your method of communicating with us, if you would please. That'll keep us going, but also be able to see what your participation, your questions, and respond as we move through the day. Okay, so some of you may be wondering, REL Central, what is that? Well, let me try to cover that quickly, but bear with me because it's a couple levels. So the U.S. Department of Ed has many components, as you know. One of them is the Institute for Education Sciences, which operates 10 regional educational laboratories. We call them RELs. The 10 have the common goal of providing data and information to inform decision-making that positively impacts education systems and their students. We have a broad base of stakeholders, whether it's state education agencies, local education agencies, nonprofit organizations. So we're here to just try to help to provide research-based data and information that can assist. REL Central, again, one of the 10 RELs, REL Central is operated by Marzano Research. And we at Marzano specialize in applied evidence-based research that integrates training, coaching, and technical support to meet the range of client, partner, and stakeholder needs. The slide here shows you the 7 states that comprise REL Central. But again, Marzano has a contract component. So even though REL is our primary responsibility, we do serve other organizations and institutions across the country. So how did we get to today? Well, we all know that over the years, dual enrollment has become a topic very central to our education system. Students are increasingly enrolling in dual enrollment courses. And I will also share with you that concurrent enrollment also is a part of that conversation. And we'll get to that a little bit later in our presentation when we talk at the state level, because we have a panelist today who will share with us the dynamics of a state where concurrent enrollment is actually in statute. But again, getting back to how we got here, within REL Central, there are multiple partnerships and alliances, and 2 of them that were very instrumental in this study being conducted were the Rural Research Education Alliance and the College and Career Readiness Research Alliance. So a couple years back, they started sounding the bell a little bit. Maybe we should take a closer look at this. That's what led to the publication of our study titled "Understanding Access to and Participation in Dual Enrollment by Locale and Income Level," which will be our focus today. And that was published in May of this year. So let's share with you, this part really excites me. We have a great panel, a great set of panelists today. As I mentioned, I'm John Lopez. I'm with Marzano Research, Joining me will be a colleague of mine at REL Central, Jing, and then I will hand it over to Jing momentarily to introduce herself, and then she will pass it over to our three panelists who bring years and years of significant administrative and executive experience in dual enrollment from the national, state, and local local school district levels. So I'll begin by passing it over to Jing.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We're so excited to share with you the findings of our new report and willing to discussing with all our presenters today. So my name is Jing Liu. I'm the researcher at Marzano Research as well as in REL Central. So I'm the co-author of this report we're going to share lately. So I'm going to pass to Amy.
Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name's Amy Williams. I am the Executive Director of the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships. I'm kind of your one-stop shop for all things dual and concurrent enrollment.
And I'm Landon Pirius, Vice Chancellor for Academic and Student Affairs for the Colorado Community College System. And so I work across the state of Colorado, and concurrent enrollment is under my purview. Prior to Colorado, I was in the Minnesota system and worked there for 20 years at institutions that did its form of concurrent or dual enrollment as well. So I have some experience at an institutional level and at a state level.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess, depending where you're at. I'm Ken Spellman. I retired 2 years ago after spending 32 years as a CTE teacher and 20 years as a CTE Central Office Administrator for the Omaha Public Schools. And I worked with all kinds of career academies, dual enrollment, magnets, a little bit of everything. I currently am a CTE consultant for the Nebraska Department of Education.
Perfect. Thank you all. And again, I can't say enough how much we appreciate you joining us. So now that you know who we are, we'd like to know a little bit about you. So you'll see a poll question here on the slide, and we're going to have our wonderful team making us look good behind the scenes, post question, and then I'll share the results in just a moment. Question is, what is your role within your organization? Ranges from post-secondary faculty, secondary teacher, school or district leader, school board member, local education agency member, or a state administrator, official, or policymaker. So we'll be getting in results momentarily. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining us and for participating. I know our panelists are excited to share their perspectives. As you just heard, they bring a wealth of experience. So we're starting to see quite a bit of actually somewhat equal distribution among post-secondary faculty, school or district leaders, and state administrators, official, or policymaker. That's encouraging. Love to have you join. Part of the purpose of this is to enact policies and that lead to practices that benefit all. So love to see that kind of representation. Okay, so it looks like the single largest group, others typically a pretty good group, but state administrator, official, or policymaker takes the title other than the category of other. So great to have you. Thank you again for joining. So we're going to move forward here with our slides, and we're going to talk about the goals for today. They're pretty simple. You see them there, as Jane mentioned earlier. She's one of the co-authors on the study. So we're going to share with you what we found from the research. And I suspect we'll have a fair amount of conversation, hopefully, about the nuances of locale and income level and how they contribute or impact dual enrollment. And then we're also going to share some experiences from our panelists in terms of how best to increase access to and participation in dual enrollment. So one of the things I want to share here, I think, Angela, I think it's at this point that we're going to drop the report into chat, I do believe. And then we're going to get into the background of the study a little bit. And here, we want to talk about the dual enrollment, the benefits of dual enrollment for students. You see them there. I think much of this is supported by well, it's all supported by the research. I think we all know much of this is not uncommon to us, to those of us in this area, in terms of positive effects on high school academic outcomes, post-secondary outcomes. Students participating in dual enrollment have a higher probability of degree attainment. And we've seen across the nation the last couple of years, and I know that Amy Williams, our executive director, she'll be able to speak to across agencies and across states. This has increasingly become a state strategic priority. I'll also throw in here at this moment that as we were preparing for this webinar, we touched bases with our colleagues, and then some reached out to us proactively to say, hey, glad to see you're doing this. And one in particular wanted to share with us that, that being REL Northeast and Islands completed a study which found that participation in an accelerated college credit program has a large positive, statistically significant effect on the probability of graduating from high school, enrolling in college within a year of graduating, and avoiding enrollment in developmental courses. And this was in one particular state or public college. But it was still, the value to them and to us is very specific. And so to focus on one college in one state, obviously that impacts generalizability, but it was still great to have such a specific focus that came with those particular results. We're going to now talk about the relevance, which again, we don't need to spend a lot of time here. If you join the webinar, you appreciate and understand its relevance, and we thank you for joining. I'll restate again the two alliances that led to the need, in our opinion, to provide this study and the resulting data information. And then increasingly, equity in dual enrollment has become an issue, which is in part what led to the focus on the inclusion of locale and income level as parts of the study. And ultimately, we want this to inform our thinking about how best to increase dual enrollment, dual and concurrent enrollment, leading to graduation and then degree attainment. So research questions, there are two of them. And we'll show you some tables and charts that speak to each of these questions. That were, what are the rates of dual enrollment access and participation? And then do the rates of access and participation vary by school locale or by percentage of students from low income households? Again, the issue of equity becoming increasingly important. We thought it important to take a look at those dynamics. I will say at this point, and another point where I'm going to ask for your patience to bear with me for just a second here, but this is an important point related to the data we're going to share with you. The data that we used were for civil rights data collection database. That collects information about dual enrollment for schools that includes juvenile justice facilities with grades 9 to 12 or with ungraded high school age students. So a broad data set. To focus a little bit for our purposes, we did not include juvenile justice facilities, special ed schools, vocation technical education schools, or alternative education schools. We did not include them in our data set for the study. The CRDC data, as we mentioned them throughout this webinar here, they are self-reported, which means that they're useful for understanding the schools and the course offerings, including dual enrollment. But because of the nature of the data set being self-reported, there are some limitations. I want to share a couple of them with you. So although the counts of dual enrollment should include any student enrolled in a post-secondary higher ed course, schools may not systematically collect the information from the higher ed institution, right? Another point to keep in mind as we look at the data, are some schools may count every student in a high school class that offers dual enrollment, regardless of whether the student enrolls in the course at the higher ed institution. All right, so the point here being, just wanted you to share that up to this point, we've seen some differences between what has occurred at the state level or the state level data set and the CRDC data set. And we wanted to be transparent about why that might be the case. So definitions. Here they are. Again, you're pretty familiar with this, but I think there are a couple of things we want to touch on. Access, meaning school level dual enrollment access. And these data are from 2017 and 18. And then access is also, we also looked at student level dual enrollment access, okay? And that student level meaning students attending a school that provided at least one dual enrollment course in 2017 and 18. Participation is the percentage of grade 11 and 12 students at a school who participated in at least one dual enrollment course. Okay. Those are probably the most critical parts of the definitions section, but I will obviously speak to the last point there being the geographic indicator of a school's distance from a population center. So we looked at, when we talk about locale, we're talking about city, rural, urban, or town, based on the NCES, National Center of Education Statistics local framework. So that's a lot of background, a lot of context. We tried to cover the most critical pieces as quickly as we could, but those are the most critical parts of the background so that as I turn it over to Jing, she can share with you the actual findings from the study. So Jing, take it away.
All right, thank you, John. So in the webinar, we will share 3 key findings from the report regarding the dual enrollment access at the school level and dual enrollment participation at student level by locale and household income level. So by seeing this figure at right now, the figure shows, hold on, I can go back. Yes, thank you. Yes, this figure shows the dual enrollment access at school level across REL Central states. So on average, the percentage of high schools that provided at least one dual enrollment course was higher in REL Central region than the national average, which is 84% compared to 78%. And next slide, please. And this figure shows the dual enrollment participation at the student level by locale for REL Central region. So some students from rural areas and towns were more likely to participate in dual enrollment than students from city or suburban areas. However, in some states, both dual enrollment access and the participation were higher in town and suburban schools than in city schools, so like North Dakota and South Dakota. And the last slide, we're going to talk about the finding. The last figure shows the dual enrollment participation at the student level by household income level for REL Central regions. To mention that again, the household income indicator is at the school level instead of student level. So here, this figure shows you schools with more students from low-income households had higher rates of dual enrollment participation than schools with more students from high-income households. So that's basically the 3 findings we want to share during this webinar. So hopefully they can bring up a lot of discussion for our next session. And if you have any questions, so just please drop your question or comments in the Q&A box. So now I'll hand over back to John for our discussion session.
Thank you, Jing. Appreciate that. And let me share with you that the study is pretty thick, pretty rich. There's a lot in there. There are multiple findings, some of which might not necessarily come to you, but that is in part why we wanted to do such a thorough job of the definitions in the background section. So we picked out those findings as what we think are the most key and the most important takeaways, and that are relatively easily digestible. But toward the end of this webinar, we'll give you the resources to go out and take a look at the entire study. I know that Angela dropped it in the chat, but there's a 15-page version, a 4 and a 1 page. So there's a lot out there for you to digest. I just want to make it clear that of all of that stuff, we just shared just a snapshot of what we thought were among the most important pieces. So now we will involve our panelists who've been patiently waiting. And before you all came on, we were already engaged in a conversation. I said, hold on, he's up. The webinar hasn't started yet, everyone. So we'll retrace those steps now and have a conversation. The thinking here is that for each conversation, and there are 3 of them actually, we have a topic, and there's some bullet points that are either for the audience, for the participants to react to ask questions. They're also for our panelists to use as cues for whatever it is they would like to share with us in relation to the conversation. I will kick off each conversation by directing the question to one of our panelists who will begin. And of course, once he or she has spoken, we're all free to share whatever we like, especially from the other panelists. So the conversation 1, strategies that increase access and participation in schools, serving students from low-income households and rural students. I'm going to start this conversation with Ken Spellman, and Ken was very brief in his introduction and very humble. Ken has a long history at Omaha Public Schools, and there's quite a diversity of students in OPS. And so I would like Ken to kick off this particular conversation to share with us some of the strategies that you found from your environment there and working across the state that increased access and participation.
Thanks, John. And I just kind of want to give a little background. My former district, Omaha Public Schools, it's the largest in the state of Nebraska. We served about 52,000 students. 1 out of 6 Nebraska students attends Omaha Public Schools. We were currently around 77% free and reduced lunch. And so we had 109 languages spoken in our district. We were an urban city school in the middle of Omaha. When I first arrived at the central office, I was in charge of all the technical education programs. And at that time, our dual enrollment process was articulation agreements. Basically, that was a handshake between a teacher, an administrator, and somebody at a post-secondary college. That created a lot of frustration as staff moved in and out of the school system and out of the college. These agreements evaporated and students were frustrated. I was frustrated and parents were frustrated. Students assumed that they earned a credit, let's say for a computer-aided drafting course, they would go over to our local community college and the instructor was no longer there. So we knew we had to change that. And so we transitioned to agreements, dual enrollment agreements. And so that was more of a formalized process. And that helped increase our numbers and our students participating. Eventually, after a lot of conversation and a lot of time building relationships with our local post-secondary community college and my CTE staff, we created around 40 to 45 dual enrollment agreements. I was pretty excited about that. I thought my work was done. We had these agreements in place and we would see our numbers increase. That didn't necessarily happen. And so teachers didn't really understand the value. Students didn't understand the value. Administrators didn't understand, and certainly parents didn't understand the value of dual enrollment. So I had some work to do, but I didn't necessarily have time to do the work. I was working with 7 high schools, 11 middle schools, 175 CTE staff on various programs of study. And I also ran the district magnet programs. And so I met with our local community college and they were frustrated as well. We just weren't seeing a whole lot of growth. So we hired an administrator and we split the cost of that administrator. And that administrator created a one-stop office. So any type of questions, concerns, comments, meetings, this person took care of. And I understand that funding is limited in school systems, but if it's a part-time position for a CTE staff member or something like that, maybe somebody from the local chamber of commerce, it really, really helped, a one-stop shop. So that way parents could make a phone call, schools could make a phone call, our post-secondary partners could make a phone call to one person and they weren't spending days on end finding out answers for this. There's nothing more damaging to your dual enrollment program than an angry parent calling the post-secondary college upset about a grade or receiving an overdue tuition invoice. My administrator for dual enrollment handled all of those type of questions and concerns. Another item that we really needed to focus on was creating a career guidance and awareness. Just because we offered the program doesn't necessarily mean students understand it, or students, or even my staff. So we created brochures. We presented in all of our CTE classes. My staff would attend open houses and parents' night. High schools would highlight the number of dual enrollment courses at their open houses. And this kind of created a friendly competition between the 7 high schools on which high school offered the most dual enrollment course. And then we'd provide annual data for schools to see how they were doing. Really dive deep into the benefits. Parents still weren't excited about community college credit and still until they understood the credit transfer process with a state college and a university. And all of a sudden the light went on. Why we're spending, parents spending thousands of dollars for a freshman math or an English course at a university or a state college when that student can complete that same coursework at a community college for a fraction of the cost. So that really helped parents understand the value of dual enrollment. And then educate your CT staff and your counseling staff and get them excited about teaching dual enrollment. There are some benefits for staff members, such as access to certain research projects, access to certain software, discounts on textbooks and material by being an adjunct faculty member at the college. And then I paid them. I paid them for any of their outside work, meeting with the post-secondary counterpart, reviewing curriculum, reviewing textbooks, but I did pay them a certain amount every year for their outside work. Eliminate barriers for students as well. Find funding to pay for textbooks, materials, and transportation. And one of the things we did with the transportation issue was we tried to host as many of our dual enrollment courses on campus. So that way students didn't have to go the 12 miles or the 5 miles to the local community college. We tried to host many of those courses at our high school or the career center, and then our district took care of the busing. Celebrate success. Recognize students at graduation or honors night as far as how many credits they earned and their progress with dual enrollment. And then also towards the end of my career, we actually included a dual enrollment portion for a portrait of a graduate. You're seeing more and more school systems come up with a portrait of a graduate. By the time students graduate high school, these are the 5 or 6 things that our school district can guarantee parents. And then make the process as easy as possible for teachers, students, and parents. We hosted tons of workshops and classes to help students work through the paperwork as far as signing up and getting enrolled in community college. We also help our teachers understand or work through the adjunct faculty member process. There's an application for that. And a lot of our teachers were frustrated as far as resumes and transcripts and things like that too. So then also help parents understand that for the most part, there are no costs as far as for students participating in the program. Nebraska does have an Access College Early Fund, ACE for short, that students can apply to help offset costs for dual enrollment. However, it's a first come, first served basis. And so a lot of our students were behind the 8 ball. A lot of our schools were behind the 8 ball. By the time we applied for this money, it was gone. And so we had a process in place. We're actually applying for this. We had students identified in the spring based on early high school registration process. We knew what juniors were signing up for senior classes. So in the fall, when this Access College Early money became available, we applied. We knew what students were going to be in these programs and these classes, and we sent our applications in, and that really helped. So we were able to get the majority of the money out of there.
Thank you.
And then also communicate, with your post-secondary partners. We hosted quarterly semester meetings with their staff and my staff, the dual enrollment staff, to keep the conversation open. I didn't want any surprises, no out of the blue type of topics. So we met with them often and really tried to build the relationships between our staff and the trust. And so that way they trusted our teachers to teach the standards, to teach the concepts on that particular course. And they knew that what they were covering at the high school was the same, or for the majority of the time, the same thing that they were teaching at the post-secondary. So those are some of my suggestions, John.
Appreciate that, Ken. I'd love to get Landon and Amy here and before we move on to the next conversation. But Ken, there was a question here that I'd like to share with you. I think it's a good question. Was the part-time CTE support / DE support person hired at the district level or state level?
It was a district level.
Okay.
And they primarily focused just on Omaha Public Schools dual enrollment. But honestly, John, we went from approximately 14% of our students participating. And after this person was in this position at the central office, we went up to around 45% of our CTE students participating in dual enrollment. So it made a huge impact.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken. Landon and Amy, I know Ken obviously spoke quite a bit about the local school district level and at a district that had high percentage of low income or lunch eligible students. Your thoughts I know Landon, for you, for the community college system, about, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe about 31 or 32% of your students are concurrent enrollment. And Colorado does have quite a rural presence. So I would appreciate any input or comments from either you or Amy on this question before we go to the next one.
Yeah, I can jump in really quick. And I was taking notes actually myself of a lot of what Ken was saying, some of which we do as well, some we don't. But as a reminder, I'm in Colorado. And just two things I wanted to mention as it related to rural students. One thing, we have 6 community colleges in rural areas. And of course, geographically, in terms of square mileage, they serve 75% of the state. Rural access is a big issue for our community colleges, partly because of teacher credential. Part of it is just because of geography, technology. There's a number of reasons. But one of the things with the federal dollars, this is new, with the federal dollars, our governor issued a grant challenge, and people in high school, at secondary, post-secondary could apply. There were no parameters in terms of what, but one of the initiatives we put together was a concurrent enrollment online and remote initiative across our rural colleges. So that, it's often that you'd have a district in one rural community that happened to have an instructor who met the credential requirements for, let's say, psychology, but for every credentialed instructor, there might have been 5, 6, 7 other districts that didn't have them. And so could we link our districts together in partnership with our community colleges and share that credentialed psychology instructor to teach concurrent enrollment across now a greater geography than just their home high school? And so that's a grant funded initiative, one that's specifically targeting rural institutions and rural populations. And also it's a way for us, or at least we think it's a way that will hopefully address some of the teacher credential issues as it relates to concurrent enrollment. So that's another strategy that we're getting underway here in Colorado.
Perfect, thank you. Amy.
Yeah, I'll keep my comments brief, because honestly, I could do a tight 3 hours on these kind of conversations. They're, very germane to the field, and they are common across the country in terms of what people are dealing with and responses to it. So a little bit more about my background. I spent more than a decade in the high school, middle school classroom, and then jumped to higher ed and have spent a little more than a decade on the higher ed side, working at both the program level at an institution and then at the system level for a state that was predominantly very rural as well. Very similar to the REL Central states in terms of the context of being rural. But I think one of the key points I would make that applies across the board to the field, but specifically to low-income students and students of color, those that are traditionally underrepresented in higher ed, rural students as well, is that there is a finite difference between building a program and then making a program work for students, and particularly the students that we know are underrepresented and have the profound ability to benefit from early access through programs like this. And so kind of the strategies that you hear Landon and Ken talk about are really those nuanced strategies, building a strong partnership so that these programs really function, that they make sense, that they're woven into both the culture of the community college or for your partner and the school district. And I think that's where you move from just having it be an option for students to having it be an option that students are actively engaging in, and a broad swath of students that have the potential to benefit from these programs as well. So there are a variety of different specific strategies. I think I've got a question I get to lead off a little later. I'll save some of those for there. But I think, Landon and Ken are both talking about things, and I was taking notes as well. Just strategies to make this work better for students, to make it more intuitive and make it built into the fabric of the education programs.
Perfect, thank you. As we move the conversation too, and we've touched on some of these already, but I'm going to I'm going to begin this conversation with Landon, simply because, as he mentioned earlier, he's in Colorado. And Colorado is unique in that concurrent enrollment is written into statute. And so I'd like him to, if you could, Landon, just give a little context about that, because I think that's quite unique. So a lot of our participants are kind of unfamiliar with the dynamics, and just talk about that perspective, and then link that, if you can, to some of what you've already done, if you have not already mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So as John mentioned, again, from the state of Colorado, and while we have dual enrollment in the state, concurrent enrollment is by far the prevalent method for this in our state, and that's largely because it's in statute. It's been in statute for coming close to 10 years. That specifically kind of outlines what is concurrent enrollment, how does it operate, how is it funded, and that has expanded almost every legislative session. There's some new bill that has come out to help address some of the issues that continue to occur in concurrent enrollment. So for us, concurrent enrollment is largely what you're going to see in Colorado. We do have P-TECH, we do have early college, we do have some dual enrollment with some of the state universities, but primarily about 85% of the opportunities for students in high school to take college credit in the state is through the community colleges and concurrent enrollment. And for us, most of that is actually done at the high schools. There are some cases, and I know, Ken, you were talking about that in Omaha. Prior to the legislation, I think there was a lot more of that happening where the students would have to actually figure out how to get to the college campus. But now it's almost exclusively happening at the high schools themselves, using the instructors at the high schools to teach those courses. And so that's a little bit about the Colorado context. But I think what we've done here, and there's an argument for and against legislation. At some point, a lot of what Ken talks about is stuff that has to happen on the ground. The building of relationships between the faculty at the college and the instructor at the high school, with the administrators, talking to parents, all of these sorts of things are things that, the legislature can't really solve. But there's also an advantage to having things in legislation in order to compel the increase. And so for us, just to give you a sense, within our community colleges, 5 years ago, we were at about 22,000 students. And then this past year, we were at 35,000 students. So a pretty significant increase in just a 5-year period of time. And a lot of that has to do with a couple of more recent legislative pieces. So I talked a little bit about the grant opportunities. That was one example specific towards rural concurrent enrollment. We had another grant opportunity, and it still exists. It's an ongoing annual allocation that's for concurrent enrollment, expansion and innovation. That's the name of the grant. And every year districts or colleges can apply. Sometimes it's used to help with teacher credentialing. Sometimes it's used for technology purposes. Sometimes it's used for partnerships. And so there's a number of different things it can be used for, but having a pot of money that is a grant source that districts and colleges can tap into has helped with the access and the expansion. We also had a bill that required that every district in the state provide some concurrent enrollment opportunities. And one thing you'll notice from an earlier slide is that not all of the districts in the state of Colorado actually had that. So that's a more recent bill and we're working towards that. But now there's legislation that says every district has to provide, it doesn't say how much, but at least some concurrent enrollment. And then the other piece that was also legislated was a communication that we needed to increase our communication. This gets at some of what Ken was talking about. And so it's our state Department of Ed, our state Department of Higher Ed, and the community college system, which again offers most of the concurrent enrollment, are required to do annual communication to parents in middle school and up. So it's not just 11th and 12th graders, it's middle school folks, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, that we have to start to communicate and talk to them about what are the opportunities, what are the benefits. And some of those things Ken talked about, the transfer piece, because there is some hesitancy. I don't know if I want my kid to have community college credit. Well, we have statewide transfer agreements and guaranteed transfer in the state of Colorado. And so we talk about, hey, you can get this for free and it will be guaranteed to go to the University of Colorado Boulder if that's the institution you want to go to when you graduate. And so communication early is important. We had communication requirements for 11th and 12th grade, but what we realized was that we had to start earlier and get families thinking about concurrent enrollment in middle school, not when the opportunity is right in front of them. And so those are a few strategies that we've had in Colorado. And as I mentioned, the growth, it's quite remarkable in a short period of time, just how big it's actually gotten.
Thank you, Landon. And I'll open it up at this point for Amy and Ken, if you have any follow-up questions or any additional insight or any comments related to, I know I was very Colorado focused, but you both have broad experiences that probably cross state lines. So just want to give a second here in case you have follow-up questions or insights related to what Landon shared.
I had a couple thoughts on it. We're seeing more. It's kind of a competitive nature with our community colleges as well. I know this past summer with COVID and everything, more and more of our post-secondary partners were offering free tuition, free textbooks, free. I mean, it was basically just to get kids engaged. And I know that there's a lot of the COVID relief funding, and somebody mentioned that earlier, that some districts have chose to offer or to help with the dual enrollment process as far as covering funds and textbooks and things like that, support for kids.
Yeah, and I'll add, and I don't want to step on Ken's toes in the CTE space, but I would add that a lot of states are leveraging Perkins Funds, and specifically we've seen a lot of good work done with the rural reserve funds, which have a specific call out for not just rural areas, but also areas with unusually high concentrations as well. And so we've seen a lot of creativity both in Perkins 4 and now Perkins 5 in leveraging those funds. And I think having that, we've also seen things like Title I funds in ESSA used as well for supporting teachers that really want to get those degrees and credentials that help them become qualified to teach these courses. And just to pick up a little on and bring the national context to some of Landon's numbers, when we look at nationally, students that are taking a college course while they're in high school, the vast majority, 86% of them are doing those courses on a high school campus. So that convenience, proximity, and cut down in transit time really makes a difference for students in their participation. And we can see them in those kind of numbers. And then when we look nationally about what type of post-secondary institutions are engaging in this, about 70% of the students that are dually enrolled are in a community college, dually enrolled with a community college and their high school too. So just a little bit bit of that context that really this in high school model is popular and prevalent, and having those partnerships with the community college has made a huge difference and is really integral in moving things forward. So as Landon and Ken both touched on, when you're dealing with populations that aren't native to higher education, maybe they're first in family, don't come from a college background, translating those credits can go and with the student anywhere is a really important conversation for them to help see the value and ultimately track out a career path, right? Because I think, students are going to college to get a career ultimately.
Amy, you created your own segue when you started talking about the national landscape. And so I took the liberty of moving to conversation 3 because I wanted to kick that conversation off with you as well. And here we're talking about any conversation that doesn't mention COVID seems a little strange. So here we wanted to touch a little bit on innovative or emergent strategies, policies, and supports that expand dual enrollment participation. And I know all 3 of you have been talking about that all along. But on this slide, I wanted to begin with Amy just because, being executive director of a national alliance, you see the range of what's out there, what's bubbling up to the surface, what's being implemented. And at the same time, it's hard to imagine that there would not have been or have not been some COVID-inspired activities and planning and practices. So I wanted to begin with you, Amy, to give us, again, as you look across the nation in your membership, share with us what you see emergent, or if you've already mentioned it, maybe you can tell us the genesis of that. So the floor is yours for all of that.
I will do the best I can. Yeah, there are 50 states in the state, and each one of them basically takes on dual and concurrent enrollment from a policy, management, oversight, funding standpoint in a little bit different with a little different flavor. But when we hear about issues and common friction points or sticking points or barriers or things like that, they do tend to circle around kind of some general areas. And so states always tend to, in my experience, think they're further behind than other states that are neighboring them. Really, a lot of the states are in kind of the same situation. So areas that we are seeing some innovative strategies, particularly in the rural space. There has been a lot of discussion about rural lately and really being more thoughtful and intentional about how we work with rural schools. One of the things that I found in the state that I was a former state CTE director and dual enrollment director in was the state of Montana. It's fairly rural. There's about 1 million people over 147,000 square miles. So pretty rural. We were able to put dual enrollment in 62% of our smallest schools, our Class C schools. Those are 100 or less students, and many of those are combined K-12 districts, not just 100 or less students in the high school. We did that because we did that because that's an important part of the culture in the state. But we found that rural schools were really eager and ambitious to work on this. They wanted to work on opportunities. They would prioritize the time and were looking for ways to expand what they offered to students and stay just, I don't want to say competitive, but stay aligned with what their colleagues and peers in larger locations were. I think with the rural schools and their eager participation and flexibility, gave us opportunities to establish really important things, which I would say the most important thing in getting into this space and working in this space is partnership, true partnership, not just sitting next to each other in a meeting. And so we worked really hard in those rural areas. What we found was teacher credentialing was one of the major problems. So we brought together grant opportunities. We used our rural reserve in the CTE space to provide technical training as well. We also found teacher turnover as an issue. So without having a really strong partnership with the school in place and really building that trust, you can't fine tune and work on those areas and do things like have a conversation about, hey, we're losing an instructor next year. What should we attend to in our hiring process, given the opportunity to? I think we are seeing a lot of flexibility, and this has already been mentioned, so I won't go into too much detail, but we are seeing a lot of flexibility in the recent stimulus packages that are allowing for spending on dual enrollment related costs. And I've seen some of the comments come up through question and answer in the comments that are indicating some of our attendees are leveraging that. I think it's a great opportunity. Our message has really been encouraging people to look at structural changes that will help them for both the short and the long term, so that it's not just trying to fill a hole with some available funding, but building some strategic capacity building opportunities in there. I would say one of the most important things when we're looking at working with low income populations, number one, affordability. But please know that if you make these things free and access is widely available, that does not always translate into students participating. And really that's the goal we're trying to get to, not just having access, not just affordability, but rates of participation for students that have the ability to benefit. And we've talked about this kind of at our organization at large, as well as when we're trying to engage populations, particularly low income populations, there is an affordability thing. And that's a known entity that is a barrier. There's also the access. And one of the coolest things about this particular REL Central study was that it showed that less privileged schools did not necessarily translate into less access. And some of our national data sets, we do see that. And so it was very positive to see that REL Central was not aligned with that trend as well. So the access component might be there, but there's another layer, and it's a more soft, squishy layer, and that's the envisioning. How do you build a culture that weaves in these opportunities so that students feel that, yes, this is for them, that they have the opportunity to become a college student and be successful in doing so in high school as well. We did a lot of work looking very carefully with our high school and college partners about the middle 50 students that were close to participating in these programs based on what the participation criteria were set by the state or the institution, and really trying to help students that are on that bubble and close prepare to understand and move towards this. So I think, you know, if I was going to leave this group with kind of one common theme nationally that helps these programs really function and function for the students that can most benefit from them, I would say become really good partners, communicate regularly, build that trust in that relationship, and build a commitment to innovate and tap dance around things and work in the gray space in the areas that you can. Build systems so that they last longer than the people that are sitting in those chairs. And by all means, get to know your data and know how to use your data. We actually had 2 really good workshops in the last couple months on both at the school district level and at the state level. Actually, Colorado was featured at the state level on one of those, about really using your data to tell a story, using your data to do strategic goal setting and tactical applications to move forward and better arrange your programs to benefit students.
Thank you, Amy. I want to depart just a little bit from the notion of access and participation, but rather than them being the end goal, because we know the benefits, I want to shift a little bit and play off what you just said in terms of data and use those data. Ultimately, I believe degree attainment is what a lot of us, I mean, these are pathways to degree attainment. And so that almost is an outcome measure. So Landon and I had a very short email string of a conversation about access and participation is key and is a step toward an outcome, the outcome of degree attainment. And using the data would lead us to say, okay, well, let's figure the next frontier of this conversation is, to what extent does this lead to degree attainment? We mentioned the REL Northeast and Island study earlier, and they focused on one school in one state to actually track those things and see what the outcomes were. So I want to turn it over to Landon real quickly. I think what you guys are doing here in Colorado is moving a little bit, using the data about access and participation, and then moving to the next iteration of what's the longer term goal. If I butchered what your message was, please tell me.
Yeah, so access and participation are big components of what we do, as I mentioned, with the legislation. But what we've done in the Colorado Community College system is tried to shift our narrative and our focus to success and having a variety of success metrics. And I think that plays actually well into what both Ken and Amy have talked about, and knowing your data and also being able to tell your story, you know, whether that's to to know whether you're successful or not, or be able to convince parents or students that this is a good opportunity for them. So we look at things like matriculation rate, what percentage of students actually go on to higher education. We actually also connect with our Department of Labor data to figure out how many students go out into the workforce immediately after high school or after they complete with us, and what is their average wage after 3 years or 5 years. So understanding the impact of concurrent enrollment on not only graduation or going to college, but what happens in college and after college. When we look at things like retention, we see almost a 10 percentage point increase for students who have concurrent enrollment versus those who don't. We look at graduation, it's a 15 percentage point difference. We also look at how long does it take students to get the degree, and it's a couple semesters less if they have concurrent, and that makes sense because they're taking college classes, but it's also good to know that. But one that was kind of counterintuitive to us, and this actually paints a bigger problem for us, was when we look at credit accumulation. For instance, a student who has gone through concurrent enrollment accumulates 61 credits towards their associate degree by the time they graduate on average. But a student without concurrent enrollment is less than that. And part of that is, we think it's because we have pathways developed in college, but we have not built those pathways down into high school. So sometimes high schools are offering concurrent enrollment through us in courses that aren't really helpful to the students in terms of their long-term pathway. So that requires us to then build. So it's a data point that wasn't a success, and it's now telling us we need to extend our career, our college pathways in partnership with our high schools. So when they select a concurrent enrollment course, like a psychology course, it's the right one for going into college, not just some random course because it's what they can offer. And so that really understanding your data is great for being able to talk about it, but also to be able to find problems and hopefully fix them. So.
Thank you for that. Amy, you had put a bow quite nicely on the takeaways through your eyes and what should be the areas of focus. And one of the key components of having participated today, if your colleague asks you, hey, what are the most important things that came of that? I really appreciate the way you did that. Thank you for doing so. I want to give that, we have about 3 minutes left. I want to give about 2 of those minutes to Landon and Ken to do the same if you would like.
Well, one of the things, John, that was kind of interesting this last year and a half with our dual enrollment was my former school, Omaha Public Schools, shut down. I mean, they basically sent kids home from March until May, but the community college didn't. And so that was kind of interesting. So we had Omaha Public School students attending classes at our local community college, taking classes, yet they couldn't be on campus at our school. And so at least it kind of helped supplement the learning process a little bit for some of the kids.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, Landon, I see you reaching for your.
Yeah, it's probably less of a summary, but just I want to, on Amy's topic of kind of innovative approaches, I neglected to mention one other thing that we have just recently done in Colorado. We are, through a pilot program, extending state aid to concurrent enrollment students. And up until this point, it was only available for students who had already graduated high school and gone on to college. And so they had to be enrolled at a college. But the reason we're doing that is because what we found is that transportation costs for those that do have to drive, although that's not that common, technology costs, course fees, book costs, those types of things are not necessarily covered by all districts. It's not required in the state statute that districts require any or cover any of them, which means some districts pay for it and some don't. And then that increases the inequities across the state. And so we've decided to take state financial aid, so our state grants, and a portion of that and make that available to concurrent enrollment students for the purpose of those costs. And so that's, I don't know if other states are doing that. Maybe Amy, they are, but that's brand new for us. And we're excited to be able to extend that to our high school partners.
Thank you for sharing that. And so with the remaining 45 seconds or so, I'll direct your attention to this slide. And this link here, you can get all of the documents from the IES site, all the reports, the appendices, and so on. So I would urge you to go there and feel free to contact me or anyone at REL Central about the webinar. Here's some contact information. And the last point here is you'll be receiving a survey. We encourage you to fill it out. Thank you to Amy, Landon, Ken, Jing, and Angela and Allison in the background, making us look good for the last 60 minutes or so. Please share with us any feedback. We would appreciate it. And thanks again for joining, and enjoy your day.